for second component section 3. Welcome back, and for all of you that are new, this is Katie Bucker in HUD's Office of Recap. We're talking about rent supplement and RAD conversions, which is section 3 of PIH Notice 2012-32, which we are getting ready to imminently issue a second revision to. So welcome. Hope you're having a good afternoon. I also have Diane Thompson with me here, who will help me with any PBB specific questions that may come up as we proceed through this slide deck. All right. This is a GoToMeeting or live meeting, and so everyone is muted right now, but you can ask questions throughout the presentation by raising your hand. And if you raise your hand and ask a question, the presenter will unmute your line and you can ask the question to us during the presentation. Feel free to ask any questions you might like to ask throughout the presentation. I don't mind, and I think that that will help us have sort of a dialogue as we go through the slide deck. You can also send in questions via the question feature in the live meeting or to rad@hud.gov, and somebody will be monitoring that email box to make sure that any questions you may be seeking the answers to, they will be answered either during the presentation or afterwards. All right, so you might be wondering why a revised notice, and the main reason we're revising the notice is to incorporate the key expansion changes authorized by the fiscal year 15 appropriations bill, which includes increasing the cap on public housing conversions, which is sort of immaterial to rent supp RAP conversions, and also the conversion eligibility for mod rehab McKinney SROs, also not important to rent supp RAP conversions, but the most important expansion change in the fiscal year 15 appropriations bill, which is not listed on this slide but will be listed on a future slide, is that it removes the sunset date for rent supp RAP conversions and expands rent supp RAP conversions to PBRA. We also are hoping to incorporate lessons from the previous 2 years, including addressing some policy gaps, improving the processing and management of transactions, and clarifying common questions that have come about in the last 3 years of doing RAD. So I have this slide, and this sort of outlines all the different changes. So the first change is that the 60,000 unit cap has been lifted and is changed to 185,000. The next is that applications for first component conversions will be taken until 9/30/2018. The next change is that mod rehab will now include McKinney Vento SROs. The fourth change is that there will be no sunset date for second component conversions, so there will be no worrying about that anymore. The next change is that PBRA is now included in the rent supp RAP universe, and the final change is that mod rehab conversions will now be processed under the second component. So, like I said, we're talking about rent supp RAP conversions today. A note on implementation. So, unless otherwise noted, the revisions to this section are effective for all transactions that have not submitted their conversion request under previous versions of this notice. I'm sure that this is going to raise all sorts of questions from external stakeholders and project owners, and so I want to make a note that projects that have already applied may be eligible to convert to PBRA, but they will have to work with their transaction manager on what must be submitted. There will be some additional submission requirements for a PBRA conversion that they'll have to procure and submit, and they'll also have to probably have a new tenant meeting, since the provisions regarding choice mobility are a little bit different for PBRA conversions than they are for PBB conversions. So this slide deck sort of goes through the changes to the notice and hits the major changes. So I'm not going to go into everything, but I do want to highlight some of the major changes. So that's what the slide deck is sort of designed to do. So for eligibility, one of the major changes is that projects must qualify as existing housing in order to convert. Previously, we had provided language that said that if the project did not meet HQS, that they could enter into an AHAP with the administering PHA. and we're eliminating AHAPs from second component conversions, so now a project must qualify as existing housing and be able to enter into an existing housing PBB HAP or into a PBRA contract at the time of conversion. Retroactive conversions will be limited to PBB conversions. We're allowing PBRA conversions now under Rent Supp RAP, and so, but we wanted to make sure that we limited retroactive conversions to PBB conversions only. We think that this will be administratively easier. It would be very difficult to take vouchers that a PHA is currently administering and switching them to PBRA, so we're not even going to attempt to do that. The next eligibility sort of question that was clarified in this notice is that previously decoupled projects will now be able to convert. They were not previously eligible to convert unless they came in for a waiver of the notice, and now we are clarifying and saying, yes, you can come in. However, HUD and owner must agree to terminate the underlying Rent Supp or RAP contract so that there is a triggering event. The next section is changes regarding resident provisions. We are introducing a new concept, which is we're limiting screening of current households upon conversion to mandatory screening established by statute. This applies to both PBB and PBRA conversions. So for a PBB conversion, a PHA who is going to administer a PBB contract for a Rent Supp RAP conversion will have to agree as a condition of administering the contract that they will only be screening current households for mandatory screening requirements established by statute, which includes sex offenders, meth production, and other unsavory activities, and will not apply discretionary screening to the current households. And I want to emphasize that it is only the current households, not new households that might move into the property later. We also clarify protection for overhoused families. We had a little bit about this in the previous version of the notice, but it didn't go into enough detail. And so this clarifies that families that are composed of 2 or more individuals will be protected at the time of conversion, but those that are single individuals in a 2-bedroom unit, for example, would not have the same sort of protection. So I don't want to go too into this because it's very complicated, but I want to note that that is codified in the notice. We also provide detailed instructions for how HCV holders at the property are treated. We allow them to convert under the PBB or PBRA contract, but we make sure that they're given ample time to consent, that the PHA is more involved in the consent process, and we also make it clear that in order for an HCV holder to be included on a PBB or PBRA contract, that there has to be a triggering event which enhances the voucher in order for them to be included. All right, we have a question. Bruce? Hi, Bruce. Bruce, you might need to unmute your line. All right, Bruce, we'll come back to you. All right, sorry we couldn't catch you, Bruce. Hopefully you'll not be shy and you'll come back to us. All right, the next slide is, so this is a brand new big change. So we will now be allowing PBRA conversions for Rent Supp RAP properties. And so I want to go through some of the important things that you should note for what a PBRA conversion will look like and how they will be processed in the Office of RECAP. So the notice establishes processing and submission requirements for PBRA conversions. So a PBRA conversion, the submission requirements will generally be the same as previous PBB conversion requests, but with the following exceptions. Owners will be required to submit an environmental review that complies with Part 50. Owners will be required to submit an RCS and a scope of work in order to establish rents. And some conversions will require a CNA to be submitted. So there's some exceptions to the CNA, and I don't want to go into all of them, but one of the major ones is that if a project is planning on doing rehabilitation, they won't have to submit a CNA. But if they are just converting their rent supp or RAD contract to a PBRA contract, then they will be required to establish a CNA. The reason that we are doing this is so that our Office of Asset Management and Portfolio Oversight will have an opportunity to look at the CNA and be able to establish an appropriately sized reserve before they execute the PBRA contract. All right, and this is probably one of the bigger questions that you all have, and that is, how will rents be set for a PBRA conversion? And it's going to be fairly simple, I think. It will be set by the lower of 110% of FMR or rents determined by a rent comparability study or an RCS. And so for projects undergoing rehabilitation, rents will be set at conversion by post-rehab rents as determined by the RCS limited to 110%. That is to say that if they will get them at closing. So post-rehab rents at closing, similar to a Chapter 15, Section 8 renewal. We have another question from Hillary. Hi, Hillary.
Hillary, you might need to unmute your line. All right, we'll come back to you.
Hillary, we'll come back to you. I hope I didn't say something wrong about environmental reviews. All right, so next slide is about PBB conversions. So for PBB conversions, we added some clarifying language. As you know, this has been sort of a work in progress with RAD conversions, and we've all learned a lot about the PBB program, and we probably could learn a lot more. We hope that some of the language that we included in the notice will help clarify some of those questions that often come up in conversions. So one of the big ones is that we're clarifying that only occupied units at the time of conversion will be included on the PBB contract. Previous versions of the notice was a little unclear on this, and so we are just absolutely stating it up front, only occupied units for PBB conversions. A second clarifying point is that only units that are occupied by tenants whose income will generate subsidy will be included on the PBB HAB contract. And what I mean by that is that if 30% of an adjusted gross income of a tenant is $500 and the contract rent is $400, that unit will not be included on the PBB HAP contract, and that is the rule from the PBB regs, and that is just that's how it should have been in the past, and so we're going to provide this clarifying language so that everybody is following that. We're also allowing rent sub contracts to remain in place. This will prevent conflict with PBB rent setting rules, which limit PBB rents to the basic rent at the property for decoupled projects. So what will happen with the PBB conversion that is undergoing a decoupling is that the owner will be allowed to prepay their underlying 236, allow the rent sup and RAP contract to stay in place for 60 days while the basic rent increase takes place, and then the PBB contract will be executed after those 60 days. That's very complicated. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to send an email to rad@hud.gov and I can walk you through it. It would take about 30 minutes for me to do it in its entirety right now, so I will not. And finally, it clarifies recap and PIH responsibilities for funding requests. There's been a lot of confusion about who sends in the HCV worksheet or the housing conversion worksheet, and there's been confusion about who sends things to the FMD and the FMC, and so everything has been sort of outlined in the notice, and hopefully that will clarify the responsibilities and will make the process go much easier. All right, that's all I have. This is a very short presentation. I hope that you all have some questions and answers so that this can office can maybe make, we can have a bit of a dialogue, but if not, that's fine too.
So Katie, while we're waiting for questions, I just had one question for you and perhaps a point of clarification. Under PBB, you say that the new notice clarifies that only occupied units at the time of conversion will be included on the PBB contract.
Mm-hmm.
When you say time of conversion, is that intended to mean the eligibility event?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, what Diane, if you couldn't hear Diane, she was asking if only occupied units at the time of conversion, what's meant by time of conversion? And what's meant by time of conversion is either the prepayment of the 236, which triggers the termination of the rent Supp or RAD contract, or the natural expiration of the rent Supp or RAD contract.
So I think that's an important distinction because the conversion is probably going to happen after.
Sure. Yeah. And I think we do say eligibility event, and maybe somehow it just didn't make it on the slide. So good distinction. Thank you, Diane.
Sure.
And we have one question from Robert Davenport.
Hi, Robert.
Yes. In the past, on the RAD website, there had been a list of mod rehab and rent Supp properties. Will there now be a list of the SRO properties published?
So Robert, there's a so you're referring to that Excel workbook that lists the mod rehab properties?
Right.
Okay. If you're familiar with that workbook, there's a drop-down menu, and on it it says mod rehab or McKinney. If you click McKinney, then it'll pull up all of the SRO projects.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do I have any other questions?
So I think that Hillary was trying to get through the environmental officer. Was she ever able to?
Oh, she accidentally raised her hand.
Oh, she accidentally raised it. Okay.
All right. Well, if that's all, if we don't have any further questions, thank you so much. The notice should be published hopefully by the end of next week. But I make no promises. And once it comes out, I'm sure you'll have many more questions. We'll also be having a webinar or external stakeholder sort of thing that internal stakeholders are more than welcome to on June 3rd, tentatively. So I would encourage you to participate in that if you can. And I'm sure that we will be sending more information about the notice and about that and any other information that maybe you would like to have via email. So hopefully you all have a great day. Thanks for joining.